Welcome to the Association 4.0 podcast, your association's no-fluff playbook to navigating and thriving in Industry 4.0 or the digital marketplace. Each week, we bring expert insights to help you and your association stay ahead of the curve.
Hello, and welcome to the Association 4.0 podcast. I'm Jennifer Proctor, and I'm joined by Sharon Rice. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Jen, and hello, everybody. We're glad to be here with you today.
Today, we're going to be talking about something that Sharon and I were talking about a little bit last week, about enabling and helping your directors and managers to become leaders. It's something that Sharon and I were talking about because Sharon actually used to be my supervisor a while ago, maybe a decade ago or so, and gave me some really great advice. And I thought that it would be great if we could actually share that with others and help other folks kind of embrace that leadership potential that so many directors and managers have, especially because I think our organizations really depend on those folks. What do you think, Sharon?
What was interesting about our conversation last week that I think, kind of a light bulb went off for me and I was reminded of is that when you think about managers and directors, they are in some ways the most important people in the association workforce. I don't know that they always are recognized in that way, and I don't know that they always feel that they are, but they are so very important. We used to talk about strategy on this spectrum of how we participate in strategy development. And so one end of the spectrum are the people that are developing strategy. So you look at the C-suite, and the VPs are often responsible for developing strategy along with the board, obviously. And then as we move across, if you think about it as a line, as we move towards the center of that line, we have the directors and the managers. And the directors and the managers are crucially important to understanding what the strategy is, especially the directors at this level, understanding what that strategy is and determining how to put it in play for the association. How are we going to execute on that strategy? And then as we continue to move down that line towards the right, every position becomes more integral in terms of actually executing and doing the strategy, doing the things that need to be done to create the strategy. But right in the middle are those managers and directors who are absolutely vital to kind of bridging strategy and execution. And that's why for me, when I was in the position, but also when I was able to move on, to become a vice president, I recognized and remembered how important those folks are to an organization. And I think that they don't get as much attention probably as they should in terms of developing their leadership.
Definitely not. I think of them as the translators, right? They're the folks who translate the strategy into the tactics. And that makes them very crucial to make sure that the things get done and the movement happens. And we neglect them. I think leaders neglect them. I think workers, they're kind of neglected on both sides of where they are in the organization. And we can really help them. And I think there's some simple strategies that we can put forward to really help them become leaders.
And actually continue whatever their career journey is. And what's really interesting, I think, with associations, I'm sure like all organizations, but, thinking about our market, which is associations, a director in a very large association, may have some of the same responsibilities that a vice president might in a smaller organization. So there is a fluidity when we talk about these titles. But what I think is essentially true about a manager or a director is, number one, is that they're translating that strategy into action, regardless of the size of their organization. Number two is they can only do that by leveraging a team. And that leadership shows up at the team level. And they may be thought leaders too. They may be SMEs, in their areas, like let's say professional development, education, but they're critically tied to the success of their teams. So when we talk about leadership from that perspective, I think that that's what we're really, looking at is how do we lead a team?
The other thing is a lot of folks who find themselves in the position of manager or director are people who did tasks really well. So they did their everyday work really well. And then they get kind of almost thrust into this position of leading other people. being a manager to other people, and sometimes they're not given those general skills on how to do that. It's not intuitive, and it is something that can be learned. When we were talking a little bit last week, we talked about the importance of creating space.
Yeah.
And I think that managers and directors creating space for themselves, and that executive leadership for creating space for their managers and directors. Do you remember what we were talking about there?
Yeah, it's about having enough capacity. And I think that this is a really interesting concept to me. It has been over the course, I think, of a number of years, determining whether you have enough capacity in your professional life to be able to do what you need to do to continue to grow and develop as a professional. I think this is true actually personally as well. There's a certain amount of space that we need to be able to really do a good job. And then also to be able to be very intentional in what we're doing as opposed to just reactive in what we're doing, and to continue to advance. And what I'm concerned about, especially pandemic and post-pandemic, is that the focus is so much still on getting the job done and recovering and getting used to the hybrid working place and all the things that have changed for people that are managing people in the last 4 years. I'm not confident this, we haven't taken a survey, but I would guess that the majority of managers and directors, if you ask what percent of your time do you have to just pay attention to your own development or to just plan or strategize even for your work, the answer would be 0 or negative, be a negative.
I think I would agree with that just based on the clients that I'm working with. And of course, I have some government clients too, and they say the same thing. So in the federal government, we see this in associations. We're seeing it everywhere. People are like, when am I going to have time to do that? And I guess what we're saying is, can you make the time knowing that some things are going to fall off and what can fall off? Because this is vitally important. And there are some things in the day-to-day that can take a break. So you as a director or manager have to look at that and figure it out. But it's really important that you do that and pick your head up a little bit to be able to look across the organization, look at what the strategy is. And you can really see, I remember when I took on one of my roles, and I use this with my clients too, and I was digging into something, and it was a very, very, very expensive project. Like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year with some partnership. And I didn't know what the partnership netted for the organization. I was like, I don't know what they're doing for us. I went to our new CEO and I said, do you know anything about this? And he said, no, I've never heard of this partnership. And I said, but look at the money that's being invested in this. And I was like, oh, I don't like how much money is going to this organization. And so I guess what I'm saying is I kind of was like, why are we doing this? And we need to get out of this contract because there's no value in it for us. Someone's wheels had been spinning about this, and we had no longer been getting any value. And so once I got in with kind of a fresh face, could just take it off the list and say, this wasn't important financially. It wasn't valuable to the organization. And I do really think that there are lots of things that organizations are doing that are not adding value, especially, that could give people the space to be able to think about their strategy a little bit more. They're taking up their time.
Yeah, I think so. But, in listening to you tell that story, there's another thing that occurs to me. I find this to be true so often, that if you are a manager or director and you've been with the organization for a while, whatever that capacity bubble is, it, started to deflate, right? It started to close, or you're losing capacity. But then somebody that's new that comes in, even though that onboarding period feels like drinking out of a fire hose, I guess I want to say, you naturally have more capacity because you don't know what you don't know. And people are, and maybe the position that you're filling had been vacant for a while. So there's other people that are taking parts of that job or whatnot. So somebody that comes in that's new generally automatically has capacity to see where things can improve. And it's so interesting because I can think back to supervisors, bosses that I have had where they were always enamored with bringing somebody new in. And I couldn't figure that out because I was thinking, well, those of us that are here, we know it better. But I wonder if part of that, we need to bring somebody new in. I think a lot of CEOs think about this is because when we bring somebody in, we have capacity, right? They have capacity. And so they're seeing things, as you're talking about, they're seeing things that if our current people had more capacity, they would probably see as well.
So how can we give our current people more capacity? I think that's the question, right?
Yeah.
Is how do we, because it's not, you don't want to just gin through people. It's not about always having, how do we give our directors and managers that
Yeah,
fresh
yeah.
outlook? It's giving them some space. Oh my gosh, please take a vacation with your vacation days. Please, spend time with your friends and family, because of course we know that that actually gives us creative energy, enables us to face your work in a more creative way, look at better solutions. It's not just about putting those hours in all the time. Sometimes actually it's better for your job to take a step away and feed yourself creatively. How can we get people to create space, and how can we enable them to create that space so that they can be refreshed in their job?
So if I'm taking the point of view of the director or the manager, I think when we're talking about creating capacity, first of all, you have to realize that you are low on capacity, right? And so what are the signs that that maybe you have a capacity issue, a personal capacity issue? These can be things like you dread going to work in the morning. You feel overwhelmed before you ever start the day. You might find yourself being, maybe testy at work, or having big reactions to things that you shouldn't have big reactions to. You may feel like you're not close to your team members, that there's a distance.
Dreading when your direct reports come into your office.
That's right. And them dreading coming to you. And you might also, there's other telltale signs, I think, of, you're possibly not being considered for new positions, that you feel like, my gosh, the place would fall apart without me. Why wouldn't they think about promoting me? So I think there's a variety of kind of signals that we need to pay attention to that could really be signaling to us that we're out of capacity. So first and foremost, you have to recognize that you're low on capacity. If you find that's true, the power that you have as a director or a manager leading a team is looking at and determining where you may need to delegate more. And one of the most common things as a consultant, when we do operational consulting, where we're looking at how can we improve operations, what we run into so frequently, so it just has to be human nature, is I'm so busy, and it's ironic when you think about it, I'm so out of capacity that I have to hold on to everything I'm doing because I don't have the time to transfer it to somebody else.
Exactly.
We
hear it all the time.
Yeah. And I remember, working with people like, where are we on a hire? Where are you on your new hire? Kind of mentoring directors and managers. And they'll be like, I can't even think about that right now. I can't even stop to interview. I don't have enough time to be able to onboard the person properly. I just have to get through this busy period. And it used to be, I really felt like when I started working with associations in the 80s, that we had more of a seasonal activity than we do right now. I think the last 15, 20 years, you would always know that during annual conference season, you're going to be super busy, or end of year or budgeting or whatnot. But that seasonality, I feel like, has largely gone away. So there's no waiting to get over this hump. You have to bite the bullet and say, okay, I need to have this temporary pain for long-term gain. And how do I now delegate to my team? How do I look at my entire team's work when I have to create capacity for myself? How do I help, if you're a director, how do I help, my managers make sure that the work is being done at the proper level and that they're able to delegate? If I'm a manager, how do I work with my supervisors, to do the same thing, the people that I'm managing that are supervisors? So I think you, number one, have to recognize that you're out of capacity. Number two, you have to address what's in your power to address as a people leader. But the other thing that's really important is that we can't do this without support from the people who are managing us. So we also have to be having a dialogue. If you're reporting to a VP or you're reporting to the executive director, whoever you're reporting to, there has to be a conversation about the fact that you're realizing you're out of capacity and you need to have support to create capacity. And the support doesn't mean that we're delegating up, right? Necessarily, although I'm not saying that's inappropriate. There may be some circumstances where, delegating up is important. It may be talking about, do we need to make another hire? Or it may be really just mentoring and emotional support as we're going through this transition of delegating, which does in fact cause short-term pain. But if your manager, your supervisor is understanding of that, they will work with you to get through that, and the entire organization is going to be better off.
My thought, though, we can look at it a few ways. That short-term pain, and yes, it can be looked at as pain, but in the way we frame it too, you can see it as opportunity. You're creating opportunity for those people who may be taking on more, who are your direct reports.
Yeah.
And I think as a director or manager talking to your supervisor, you're probably more likely to get that support you need if you frame it as an opportunity for the organization rather than this is going to be a pain for the organization. And this is my communications,
Yeah, no, I
let's frame
understand
everything.
absolutely.
Let's frame everything in a way that's going to win for us. But this is going to be an opportunity if we can do this. It's an opportunity for you, the manager, to be able to grow in your leadership skills. It's an opportunity for those people who are taking on some new skills. People like change. Mostly, they like to be needed. They like to be important in an organization. And if you kind of can let them know, this is really important and I need you to do this. And what can you take off of their plates?
Yeah.
To make that capacity. The other thing that, I was thinking about when we were talking last week was sometimes we have to empower the people who work for us to make decisions. In that, when you're head down, so busy that you can't even breathe, you want to know everything that's going on. Should I do this or this? Should I do this or this? And these minute decisions, you think that that's what's helping you keep track of what's going on with your team. But I don't think that that's always the most effective way. Sometimes I think we need to empower our teams to be able to make decisions and embrace their leadership skills.
I mean, that's really true. And one of the things that is interesting to me, I mean, we have personality types, right? The people that manage us have preferences. The people who we're managing have preferences. And one of those preferences is how much we need to have our fingers on all the activities that are going on around us, right? There are a lot of really good people in the world that we work with that feel like if they don't have all the information, that they're insecure. They're not going to be able to tell their bosses exactly what's going to go on, that somehow they don't look like they're doing the job or that they have the finger on the pulse of what's going on. And one of the things that I learned along the way is that it's a perfectly acceptable response to say, I'm not sure, I need to check on that, let me get back to you. I'll admit that there are some bosses that don't like that as a response. They want their managers or directors, whoever they're supervising, to be able to, whip that stuff off because it makes them feel more secure that the manager or the director has all the information all the time. But when you need to have all the information all the time, it's a signal that somewhere there's a lack of trust that work is going to get done. And so I do think, even as an exercise, it's really interesting. If you look at the hierarchy of people management from supervisor to VP, to be able to say, I should always know information at this level, but I don't need to know information below that level. I don't need to recall that instantly. I can go back and check on it, but I should always know information at this level. I've never done that before, but it's appealing to me right now because it's a kind of a hierarchy of what we need to know.
I have done something in some of my meeting facilitations where it's how can we build trust among this team?
Yeah.
How do you individually, what makes you trust a person that you work with? And then as a group, what can we do? And seeing some of the overlap and the differences and actually just talking it out has been really, really effective, I think, for some of the groups that I've worked with.
Yeah, again, that's part of the capacity. If we're always chasing information, if we always have to know everything, and I think status reporting is great. And one of the things that I have noticed about status reporting, we have, as consultants, we have a pretty, important discipline around status reporting for our clients. But I think how status reporting creates capacity for managers and directors is if they ask the person that's reporting to them to create the status report so that they can very quickly, once a week, take a look at that bulleted list, right? You don't want it to be extensive and get that sense of confidence. Okay, it seems like the projects are working well and we're, moving through them. Then that creates capacity, right? We don't have to have the long conversations about it. You don't have to go running after the information, just that activity of status reporting. And people think it's a pain. I know, to sit down at the end of the week and create a one-page status report, but there's a real benefit to the person that's creating it as well, because
then you can see where you've been successful, where how many things that you've done or completed or whatever,
or what if something is not working well, perhaps thinking through why it's not working well or what the risks are. You're looking at it kind of from a holistic perspective. But if you do that at the end of the week, to your point about being able to create capacity that lets you have a personal life, it's a good way to put the week to bed before the weekend and just to say, okay, this was my week this week. This is what we got done. This is how this works. And relieve your mind a little bit of work as you're transitioning into the weekend. I found that very helpful with clients when I'm working on them to say, okay, that was this week in this client life. And then, not have to carry that with me into the weekend. So I think that both creating a status report and asking people that report to you to create status reports is a good way to build capacity.
And then if you do meet, you don't go through every bullet one by one. You go through the bullets where you're challenged, making sure to note where you're challenged. And that's what you have the conversation about. Where are the challenges that have arisen? Having a conversation either with the person who's supervising you or with the team. Because listen, there's nothing like getting a group together to really talk about where we could overcome some challenges and not just accept that they're there and have them keep reappearing week after week after week.
So this term capacity building or personal capacity building has been very meaningful for me in my life over the last 10 years or more, probably more at this point. But the other thing that I've been like, I feel like I have a good handle on the capacity building and how important that is. There's a twin concept there, and that's intentionality. And that's the one I have to say, I'm not sure that I'm completely enlightened around intentionality yet. But if you create capacity, you can be more intentional with your work, and you can be more intentional in your relationships, and you can be more intentional with your career. I would say one of the differences between you and me is I feel like you're more intentional than I am. And I create space and then I chase, kind of things that I'm interested in. But I would not say, especially when it comes to my career, that I have intentionality.
Most people I know, when I talk to them about their careers, have had it's been a mixture of intentionality and luck and just kind of circumstance. It's a mix of all of that. And I certainly have experienced that myself. I think that going back to what we talked about, thinking about things as an opportunity, taking on new things as an opportunity is something that I have found very important to me. But I like new things. I like variety and I like new things. I'm guessing that a lot of other people do too. Even though people may be resistant to change, going through and talking to them about things and how work might change, because we know work, and not to change the subject, but you and I are doing some things with AI, for example.
Yeah.
Work is fundamentally changing, and work always has fundamentally changed. Kind of thinking about how do we create the space to embrace that, I think is important.
I'd like to kind of pick up on that for a second, because I think AI is a really interesting and it's a good example. I think that AI is the biggest kind of development hitting associations for good and for bad, mostly for good, or it has mostly the potential for good, I believe, since the advent of the database in the 70s. I don't know that we have completely have our arms around this yet, and we're, kind of thinking towards it. And we're doing at orgSource a lot of work right now. We've had a number of clients that we've been kind of thinking this through with, but it's a good example because as we talk to CEOs to say, hey, are you thinking about AI and how is your organization dealing with AI? The most common response we're getting, and this is so typical for associations in general, is we're going to hold back, we're going to wait and see. Let's talk about intentionality and capacity related to that. A lot of times when we're going to hold back and wait and see at whatever level in the organization that's happening, it's because we don't feel like we have the capacity to take it on. Now, some things are risky and we may feel like, oh, well, we need for some things to settle. I don't think that's true with AI. I think we need to start now to be getting our arms around that. But you have to have a certain amount of capacity. If I'm a director or a manager, now some things are risky and we may feel like, oh, well, we need for some things to settle. I don't think that's true with AI. I think we need to start now to be getting our arms around that. But you have to have a certain amount of capacity. Right now, technically speaking, I'm going to want the capacity to be thinking about how AI fits into my work. And when I say that, I just want to be really clear. There are some associations that have policy around AI and how we use, let's say, ChatGPT or Google Gemini or whatever, tools you're looking at. And I think that you have to have capacity to play with those. You need to stay within your association's policy as you do that. But
Absolutely.
what you really need the capacity to do is to start thinking about how AI both positively and negatively impact our work. So as your association is ready to have those conversations, you're ready to have those conversations.
I read somewhere for some of the research I'm doing for a client that, no matter how you personally feel about AI, you should start trying to use it right now.
Mhm.
Don't wait till tomorrow. Don't wait till next week. Don't wait till next year. Try to use it as soon as you can, because it's going to keep evolving. It's going to keep changing, and it's a deep end, but you have to kind of jump in
Yeah,
and do it.
and I think that when we are able to put our hands on this kind of technology, and depending on where you are in the organization, like our IT folks have a different level that they're going to play with it, than
Absolutely.
let's say our marketing department. When you have the ability to think through this and not feel threatened by it, but start, as we're saying, playing or thinking about how do we apply this, it does take that fear away. And, when, again, coming back to the sense of capacity, when we're out of capacity, we're often fearful. We feel like
Right.
we're on the brink. We are afraid that we could lose our job because we're not keeping everything together. We're afraid that we're going to be passed over. And sometimes I've even heard managers say, and I completely understand this, if they keep telling me how valuable I am in this position, but I don't get promoted, I think I'm too valuable in this position to get promoted, because they just want me to kind of handle all the things that I'm handling. So again, creating the capacity is super important. And I think when we think about who's responsible for creating capacity in our work lives, it really is us. It's important to have support from our leaders for sure, but directors and managers have to genuinely want to create the capacity to be more strategic in their thinking, to be able to spend more time mentoring their teams and developing their teams and interacting with their colleagues in a meaningful way, the kinds of things that make work gratifying, that help advance us in our careers. But at the end of the day, we have to want to create that capacity, and we have to be dedicated to doing that for ourselves.
Absolutely. And just one thing I'll tack onto that, when we're talking about talking to our colleagues, how important that is to be connecting with peers, finding out where their strategy is taking them, where new projects that are on the line for them, because I think we find that we can support in a way that maybe they never realized, that can give our teams some meaning and some direction, and also just kind of help us figure out where they are in the organization and really connect them to the overall strategy of the organization. And I think that it's important to talk to your peers too.
Yeah, and I didn't think about it in that way before, but you're absolutely right. So if we get a support from above and we need support from below, and we are also that support to the people that are reporting to us,
absolutely,
that peer relationship is another way that we can be supported in this journey, because usually if somebody's out of capacity in an organization, they have plenty of company, right? Because it may even be the unintentional culture of an organization that directors are overly busy, or that managers are overly busy. So you're going to see that across the organizational chart. And so, those folks getting together and recognizing that they can contribute at a higher level if everybody creates some capacity, I think is super important. A question, as I've been thinking about this over the last week, and, we're talking today, I'm trying to, kind of think about what are some of the things that people should consider in order to create capacity. So we've talked already about making sure that work is done at the right level within the organization. We've talked about status reporting as a way of, staying informed at the appropriate level, and then not delaying hiring. If you've gotten the okay to hire a position, make that a top priority.
Exactly. Do that job description, make that hiring, figure out how to make that work, because it will enhance your team.
Yeah, and do a good job onboarding, even when you don't feel like you have the time or capacity.
That is so important, because also that's what gets the person who is hired onto your team, also gives them energy, right? And if you don't do a good job onboarding them, they may question why they ended up at your place to begin with.
Another thing, again, I feel like this was something that I wasn't particularly good at, but I see the value of now, especially looking backwards, is being able to create and set boundaries in terms of creating capacity. And that happens both in understanding what you need, what you should and should not be doing, and then kind of sticking to that. It can also be, you'll remember this, but we instituted a no meetings Monday. And that was a form of a boundary, when you think about it. And it's also a form of capacity, that we needed one day where people weren't just running from meeting to meeting. I think that that's another capacity building tool. Are there any other things that you're thinking about?
The other thing that I just mentioned was also taking a look at all the things that you're doing and making sure to slough off the things that are not adding value. And that if you're doing, for example, a newsletter every week, but you look and no one opens that newsletter, then why are you doing the newsletter? That's where you need the data to support those decisions, but get the data to make the case to what's valuable in an organization and what's not.
I mean, there are definitely sacred cows to the members that I think every association deals with that, where they know nobody's reading the newsletter, or, there's a certain program that's being offered, but, the attendance is dwindling and people aren't using it. And it's hard to make those calls, but almost never have I heard an association that's had to sunset a program going, oh, that was a mistake. I mean, seriously, almost never have I heard that. If you get as far as being able to make a point to sunset a program that isn't driving value to the organization and people aren't participating, it takes some courage, but it's typically the right move. Creates a lot of capacity.
And I would argue that sometimes those programs can be something big that requires a plan to sunset. Sometimes what you may be spinning your wheels or spending your time on, it could be something even smaller than a program. Really take a look at that and see. Here's the thing about capacity. In order to add capacity, you have to take something away. There's a finite amount of time in a day. We can't just keep adding things to the load and expecting that everything will get done in the same high quality. Something has to come off.
And again, it goes along with that intentionality of being really intentional with what you're doing, how you're spending your time, how the association's spending its money.
And it also is helpful then in that case to really know the strategy of the organization and knowing what you're doing and what your tasks are fit into the overall strategy of the organization, or if they don't.
Yeah. And again, coming full circle, the director manager level within the organization, why is it so critical? It really is just because of what you said. They're in a unique position. If you're a director, if you're a manager, you're in a unique position to both understand the strategy of the organization, but also where potentially the waste is that is pulling time, attention, money away from achieving that strategy.
Because they just have an intimate knowledge of the products and services that the leadership team typically doesn't. So full circle.
Our unsung heroes.
That's definitely true. I think for everyone that I meet, because they're also very, very dedicated to their organizations. Let's not neglect them anymore.
I think that's the message. Take care of yourself. And if you're a vice president or CEO, listen to the podcast. Be sure that you acknowledge how important those folks in your organization are. Hopefully also the board recognizes how important they are as well.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thanks so much, Sharon. It's a pleasure as always to talk to you.
It was fun. And as we post this podcast, it would be really interesting to hear from you about what are the different kind of tactics you have that help you create capacity in your career. And maybe we can kind of get a list together and share that out across the orgSource community.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and discovered tips and information that will add value to your leadership style and your association. orgSource specializes in positioning teams for success with solutions for technology, strategy, and marketing. Please contact us at info@orgsource.com or visit www.orgsource.com to find out how to keep your organization on track to Association 4.0.